Welcome back to Don Blessing's Story Studio. Tonight, we step into the dark heart of the Blood Moon saga, where hunters, witches, wolves, and vampires clash in a war that will decide the fate of the panorama world. Ethan, the hybrid cursed by two legacies, and Dante, the vampire bound by vengeance, must face an ancient evil that could enslave them all, Lord Varik. This isn't just survival, it's war. Before we dive in, hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves dark fantasy, and subscribe so you never miss the next saga. Now, let's enter the shadows of Blood Moon 2.
Branches snapped as Ethan tore through the forest, hunters at his heels. Silver bolts cut the air, hissing past his head and splitting bark in showers of sparks. He ducked low, claws carving into the dirt, then launched himself off a fallen log, twisting in midair. A bolt grazed his shoulder, searing his flesh, the stink of burning skin filling his nostrils. He hit the ground rolling and came up snarling. The hunters didn't hesitate. 3 of them broke from the tree line, crossbows reloaded, blades gleaming at their sides. Their movements were precise, disciplined, nothing like the wild brawls of wolves or the reckless lunges of vampires. These men were killers trained for one purpose, and tonight, that purpose was him. Ethan lunged at the closest, claws flashing. The man swung his blade, catching Ethan's forearm in a spray of blood, but Ethan's momentum carried through. He ripped into the hunter's chest, hurling him aside like a rag doll. Before the body hit the ground, 2 more bolts thudded into Ethan's ribs. Silver burned deep. His knees buckled, but he forced himself upright, tearing the shafts free with a roar. "Hold him!" one hunter barked, rushing with a chain glinting in the moonlight. Ethan smelled silver on it. The chain lashed around his throat, burning like fire, choking off his air. He thrashed, claws raking sparks off the links, but the hunter tightened his grip, teeth gritted as he dragged Ethan down. Another hunter closed in with a stake. Ethan's vision blurred, pain screaming through his body. Desperation surged. He left the hybrid side loose. His eyes burned crimson, his fangs elongating, his strength doubling. With a violent twist, he yanked the chain, dragging the hunter off his feet and slamming him into a tree hard enough to crack bones. The last hunter charged, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Ethan caught the man's wrist mid-swing, claws sinking deep, then twisted. Bones snapped. The hunter screamed, dropping his weapon. Ethan didn't hesitate. His jaws tore into the man's throat, hot blood flooding his mouth. The other hunter tried to rise, but Ethan hurled the broken chain at him, wrapping it tight around his neck. A single savage pull silenced him. Panting, bleeding, Ethan staggered back, his chest heaving. His wound smoked where silver had bitten him, but already his hybrid blood worked to heal them. He stood over the corpses, claws dripping, heart pounding. His pack would never see this as strength. They would only see a monster. And maybe they were right. But the hunters were only the beginning. Their scent was everywhere, spreading through the forest like wildfire. This wasn't a random ambush, it was a purge. They had come for all of them. Wolves, vampires, witches, anything not human. Ethan stumbled toward the river, washing blood from his hands, his reflection staring back with gold and crimson eyes flickering in turn. He wasn't wolf, he wasn't vampire. He was something else, and tonight, the world had marked him as enemy number 1. The iron gates of Castle Vane groaned as Dante shoved them open, his cloak torn, his chest still aching from Ethan's claws. He staggered into the torchlit courtyard where his coven waited in silence, crimson eyes watching. Not one dared speak, until a deafening crash split the air. A flaming bolt slammed into the wall, showering stone and sparks. "Hunters," Dante hissed. His voice carried no fear, only rage. Dozens of figures surged through the mist beyond the gates, crossbows raised, firepots in hand. They moved with chilling precision, spreading to encircle the castle. The first volley of bolts screamed through the night, striking stone, shattering glass, and pinning one of Dante's fledglings to the wall in a spray of ash. "Kill them all," Dante roared. His coven exploded into motion. Vampires blurred forward, ripping through the first wave of hunters in sprays of gore. But these weren't peasants with torches. These were professionals. Lines of silver-tipped spears shot upward, impaling 3 vampires mid-leap. Explosives lit the sky, shattering balconies and raining debris into the courtyard. Dante drew his blade, black steel humming with centuries of blood. A hunter lunged at him, silver axe raised, but Dante moved faster than the eye could follow. One slash opened the man from neck to belly, guts spilling across the stones. Another hunter came with a flaming torch. Dante caught his wrist, crushed bone like twigs, and sank his fangs deep into his throat, drinking until the body collapsed like an empty skin. Above the carnage, a voice carried across the battlefield, cold and commanding. "Purge them by the order of the Lord." Dante's head snapped up. A hunter commander stood at the gate, his armor scorched black, his eyes burning with fanatic light. But the words chilled Dante for another reason. The Lord he served wasn't a king of men, it was Varik. Dante's fury twisted into dread. If Varik had returned, and if he had humans kneeling to his will, the panorama world was already doomed. He cut through another hunter, ripping his head free, blood spraying across the courtyard stones. Around him, his coven fought like demons, but for every hunter that fell, 2 more pressed forward. The castle itself began to collapse. Flames climbed its walls, smoke choking the night. Ash filled the air as bodies turned to dust. Still Dante fought. His blade carved a path through the invaders, his fangs dripped with blood, his eyes blazing red with vengeance. But even as he slaughtered, a single truth hammered in his mind. Varik was back, and this war was no longer about wolves and vampires. It was about survival against a master who would enslave them all.
The hunters' order did not sleep. At dawn, their fortress burned with activity. Rows of men and women strapped into armor, silver gleaming like the rising sun. Black banners hung above the stone walls, stitched with their creed. By fire and silver, the world is cleansed. Commander Harker strode across the courtyard, his boots echoing against cobblestone. His scarred face was hard as steel, his eyes cold as the grave. In one hand, he carried a silver-tipped spear. In the other, a torch that never dimmed, its flame blessed by witch-blood sacrifice. He raised both, and the crowd silenced. "Last night the filth screamed from their holes," Harker thundered. "Wolves, leeches, witches, they rot our world with their shadows. But no longer. By command of the Lord, we cleanse them all." The hunters roared as one, fists raised, the sound shaking the courtyard like thunder. Behind them, wagons rolled in, stacked high with weapons, repeating crossbows, silver grenades, chains soaked in holy oil, pikes taller than men, and cages, rows upon rows of cages, meant for the creatures they would drag back alive for execution. The gates swung open. Hunters poured into the world like a flood. Their boots thundered through villages, their firepots igniting forests.
Wolves who dared to howl were cut down with silver arrows before their packmates could blink. Vampires fleeing daylight were dragged screaming into the sun. Witches were bound in chains, their throats cut before their spells could form. One by one, panorama creatures fell. The world that had lived in shadows for centuries was being dragged into the light and slaughtered. Blood painted rivers black. Ash choked the skies. On a hill above the carnage, Commander Harker stood with his officers, watching the purge. "Let them hide," he growled, torchlight burning in his eyes. "We will smoke them out. The Lord has promised us dominion over this land, and when the last monster burns, the world will be ours." At his side, a priest muttered incantations, blessing each weapon with holy venom. Silver glowed like moonlight, ready to tear through flesh. And as the hunters marched deeper into the forests, one name spread like wildfire among them, whispered with hatred and fear alike: the hybrid. They had never seen one before, a wolf-vampire cross, stronger than both, unnatural, abomination. Ethan had become the symbol of everything they sought to erase. The order had been given: kill the packs, burn the covens, crush the witches, and above all, hunt the hybrid. The scent of gun oil and ash hit Ethan's nose long before he saw them. He crouched low in the ruins of an abandoned chapel, ears twitching, claws flexing against the stone floor. The hunters were closing in. He could hear their boots crunching glass, the faint rattle of chains. He was boxed in, and they knew it. The first bolt shattered the chapel's stained glass window, showering him in shards. Ethan rolled aside, but another volley ripped through the pews where he had been crouching. The wood exploded into splinters. A flash of pain lit his side as silver buried into his ribs, searing flesh like molten iron. With a snarl, Ethan burst through the chapel doors, claws carving grooves in the rotten wood. He tore into the first hunter he saw, shredding his throat in a spray of blood. The second swung a silver axe. Ethan ducked, drove his claws into the man's gut, and hurled him through a crumbling wall. But more were waiting. Chains wrapped around his neck and arms, sizzling where they touched. Ethan roared, his strength snapping one set, but another looped tight around his legs. He went down hard, slamming into the dirt as boots pinned him in place. Hunters swarmed, driving stakes into his shoulders, forcing him down. His claws tore through two of them, blood spraying his face, but the weight was too much. "Hold him!" one shouted. Silver stakes hammered into the ground, binding the chains tighter. Ethan's muscles trembled as he strained against them, his hybrid strength tearing grooves in the earth. But for every link he broke, two more were thrown over him. The commander stepped forward. His armor gleamed black in the torchlight, his scarred face impassive. Harker. Ethan recognized the name instantly from the whispered stories. This was the man who had ordered the purge. "Look at you," Harker said coldly, crouching to meet Ethan's eyes. "The proof of corruption, wolf tainted with vampire filth. Your kind is the reason the world rots. But don't worry." His lips twisted into a cruel smile. "We'll cut that filth out of you before you burn." Hunters yanked Ethan's head back, forcing his fangs into the light. Chains bit into his jaw, locking his mouth open like an animal about to be slaughtered. Pain seared every nerve in his body, but worse than the pain was the helplessness. No pack to come, no allies, only him, alone. For the first time since becoming hybrid, Ethan felt death closing in. He thrashed, claws shredding dirt, but the chains only dug deeper, silver eating into his flesh. Blood soaked the ground beneath him. The hunters raised their weapons. The order had been given: Tonight, the hybrid would burn. The hunters dragged Ethan into their camp like a trophy. Chains rattled, silver sizzling against his skin with every step. He stumbled, blood dripping from wounds that refused to close. Torches lit the clearing, casting shadows over rows of cages, wolves snarling weakly, witches bound and gagged, vampires twitching under silver restraints. Ethan was thrown among them like meat, his chains hammered into the earth. Commander Harker stood above the prisoners, his voice carrying through the camp. "Behold, the end of the abominations! Tonight the hybrid burns. Tomorrow we burn the rest." The hunters roared, raising weapons, firelight reflecting in their fanatic eyes. Ethan struggled, muscles tearing against the chains. His vision blurred crimson, but no strength could break this trap. He felt the heat of the pyre as hunters built it higher, wood stacked with oil and salt. He had spared Dante once. Maybe he should have killed him. At least then he wouldn't die alone. The air shifted. A chill swept the clearing, dimming the torches. Shadows thickened unnaturally, and with them came a whisper of movement too fast to track. The first hunter fell without a sound, his throat opened wide. The second stumbled back, clutching his chest as a blade punched clean through his ribs. Then the night exploded in screams. Figures dropped from the tree line, vampires, their eyes glowing, their fangs tearing into throats. Hunters spun to meet them, but chaos had already spread. Flames from toppled torches ignited tents, smoke choking the air. The hunters' neat ranks dissolved into blood and fire. Through the chaos strode Dante, cloak billowing, blade dripping red, his eyes locked on Ethan chained to the ground. "Pathetic," he said coldly, even as he cut down a hunter charging at him. "I thought the great hybrid would last longer." Ethan spat blood. "Why are you here?" Dante drove his sword into another hunter, twisting until the man dropped limp. He yanked the blade free, stepping closer. "Because you spared me, and debts must be paid." With a single strike, he shattered the chain binding Ethan's neck. The burning pain eased just enough for Ethan to move. He tore through the remaining bonds with a roar, claws ripping silver as sparks flew. Hunters turned to stop him, but now Dante fought at his side, fangs flashing, blade singing through flesh. Together, they carved a path through the camp, hunters falling one after another in sprays of blood. The pyre went up in flames behind them as the camp collapsed into ruin. Hunters fled into the trees, dragging their wounded, leaving their commander screaming orders no one followed. Ethan staggered upright, blood-soaked but breathing, his eyes flickering between gold and crimson. He turned to Dante, chest heaving. "You saved me." Dante smirked, baring fangs still wet with blood. "Don't mistake it for mercy. You owe me now, and soon you'll pay." The night stank of blood and smoke. Ethan limped through the burning ruins of the hunter camp, his claws slick, his skin blistered where silver had touched him. Behind him, Dante walked as if untouched, his cloak trailing firelight, his blade still dripping. "You're slowing down," Dante sneered, glancing at the hybrid's wounds. Ethan bared his teeth. "I'm still standing." "Barely." Dante's eyes glittered red. "If you die now, my debt remains unpaid, so keep moving." Before Ethan could reply, the ground shook with the thunder of boots. From the trees the hunters returned, not scattered this time, but in formation, shields locked, crossbows leveled. The survivors had rallied under Harker's command, their torches blazing against the night. "Hold the line!" Harker roared, silver spear gleaming. "The hybrid dies here! The leech dies with him!" Bolts flew. Ethan ducked, claws deflecting some, others sinking deep into his shoulder. He roared, ripping them free. Dante blurred into motion, weaving between shafts, his blade carving through the first rank before they could reload. But the hunters were prepared. A net of chains whistled through the air, silver links burning as they wrapped around Dante. He hissed, thrashing, fangs snapping, but 3 men dragged him to his knees. Another squad lunged for Ethan, driving him back toward the pyre. Ethan's claws flashed, ripping through shields, but more bolts punched into his chest and legs, forcing him down. He dropped to one knee, blood soaking the earth, vision tunneling. "Burn them both!" Harker bellowed. Hunters closed in, torches high. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Something deep inside him stirred, the same surge that had turned his eyes crimson under the blood moon. Power rippled through his veins, cracking the ground beneath him. His roar shattered the air like thunder, flinging hunters backward in waves. The chains binding Dante snapped as Ethan's aura washed over them, the hybrid strength tearing through the silver as if it were twine. Dante rose, fury blazing in his eyes, and together they struck back. Ethan ripped through men like a storm, claws tearing armor apart, blood spraying in arcs. Dante moved with surgical precision, his blade cutting down commanders, his fangs ripping into the strongest among them. The hunters' formation broke, their screams lost in the blaze. Harker alone stood firm, his spear raised, his voice carrying above the chaos. "This isn't over, abomination!" His eyes locked on Ethan. "The Lord himself will see you burn!" With that, he vanished into the smoke, leaving his men to die. Breathing hard, Ethan stood among the corpses, his wound steaming but closing slowly. Dante sheathed his blade, smirking through bloodied fangs. "Looks like we're both hunted now," Dante said. Ethan's gold and crimson eyes narrowed. "Then we fight back."
Smoke still curled from the ruined camp when Dante led Ethan into the trees. The hybrid's wounds glowed faintly, his body caught between healing and burning from silver. Every step hurt, but he kept up. The silence between them was heavy until Dante finally spoke. "You think hunters move like that without someone feeding them information?" His tone was sharp, his crimson eyes scanning the tree line. "No, they've been guided." Ethan snarled softly. "By who?" Dante stopped, his fangs glinted in the moonlight. "One of my kind, Lord Varik, old as the first cities, ruthless. He believes humans should be cattle. He's been stirring the order, whispering in their ears, pointing their blades not only at us, but at all panorama creatures, wolves, witches, even my rivals." Ethan's claws flexed. "So while they slaughter my kind, he builds his empire." Dante nodded. "Exactly. And when the hunters are finished, he'll cut their throats too." The hybrid's growl rumbled like thunder. "Why tell me this? You could walk away, let me bleed out, let the hunters finish their purge." "Because," Dante said, stepping close, his voice low and hard, "Varik isn't just after me. He wants dominion over the human world and the panorama realm. He'll turn it all into his feeding ground, and I don't intend to be anyone's servant." A distant horn blew through the forest. Both froze. It wasn't the hunter's call. It was deeper, ancient. Ethan's nostrils flared. Dante's eyes narrowed. "Witches," Dante muttered. "Even they're running.
The hunters are spreading like wildfire. Ethan clenched his fists, so it's not just us. Dante's smirk was sharp. No, but only we have a chance to stop it. He glanced at Ethan, almost grudging. You spared me. I've repaid that debt. But if Varik wins, you'll wish you had killed me when you had the chance. Ethan met his gaze, eyes flickering crimson again. Then we make him regret ever coming after us. For a moment, predator and predator stood side by side, the forest silent around them. Two enemies, bound not by trust, but by necessity. Then the ground trembled. From the shadows ahead, torches flared, and dozens of hunters poured into the clearing, their eyes burning with zeal, their weapons glowing silver in the dark. Dante grinned, fangs flashing. Looks like our conversation will have to wait. Ethan's claws slid free, his voice a growl. Good, I was getting restless. And together, they charged.
The forest erupted in chaos. Hunters surged forward in disciplined ranks, shields locked, torches blazing like a wall of fire. Behind them, war horns wailed, echoing through the valley. But they weren't alone. From the tree line, wolves leapt with snarls, their fur bristling, their eyes glowing. Witches appeared in bursts of flame and smoke, their hands blazing with spellfire. The panorama world had answered the hunters' challenge. The two armies slammed together like colliding storms. Silver blades clashed with claws, crossbow bolts streaked through the air, and spells cracked like lightning. Wolves dragged hunters to the ground, ripping through armor. Hunters answered with burning chains, yanking beasts screaming into the flames. Ethan tore into the fray, his hybrid form surging with both fury and instinct. His claws split shields, his fangs sank deep into throats, his strength scattering men like leaves. Silver still burned in his wounds, but the surge of battle pushed him forward. Each kill fed his rage, and with each roar his eyes flared crimson brighter than before. Dante moved like a shadow beside him, his sword flashing, his movements a blur. He decapitated one hunter, spun to impale another, and melted into the ranks with inhuman grace. Where Ethan was raw fury, Dante was precision, a predator with centuries of practice. A witch screamed nearby, 3 bolts pinning her against a tree. Ethan lunged, ripping the hunters apart before they could finish her. She gasped, her dying spell exploding in blue flame that seared 5 men to ash. Ethan staggered back from the heat, his skin blistering, but he didn't stop. The clearing became a slaughterhouse. Wolves fell in droves, their bodies writhing in silver nets. Hunters were dragged under waves of claws and spells, their screams piercing the night. Smoke and blood thickened the air until it was hard to see. Through it all, Commander Harker cut a path with his spear, his voice carrying above the screams. "Burn them all! The Lord demands it!" His zeal drove the hunters harder, their lines unbroken despite the carnage. Then the ground itself shuddered. A rift split open near the battlefield, green fire spilling out. Witches screamed in horror. This was no spell of theirs. From the rupture stepped cloaked figures, pale and regal, their eyes glowing crimson. Vampire heralds, servants of Varik. Dante froze, his fangs bared. So the old bastard finally sends his dogs. Ethan growled, his claws dripping with blood. Looks like the real war begins now. The battlefield went still for just a heartbeat,
Hunters, witches, wolves, all turned as the vampire heralds lifted their hands. Dark power surged into the air, blotting out the moon. Then, everything exploded again. The battlefield trembled as the vampire heralds advanced, their black cloaks sweeping the ground, their pale faces untouched by the chaos. They moved with eerie calm, their glowing eyes scanning the carnage like judges at an execution. Hunters hesitated. Even wolves and witches drew back. These were no common creatures. These were Varik's chosen. One herald raised his hand, and a hunter's torch snuffed out instantly. The man screamed as his body crumpled into dust, flesh withering in seconds. Another herald whispered, and a witch's spell rebounded, consuming her in her own fire. Panic rippled across the lines. Dante snarled, recognition flaring in his eyes. Caius, Vera, Malric, Varik's lapdogs. I should have known he'd send you to clean his mess. Caius, the tallest, stepped forward, his voice smooth as poisoned silk. Dante, the traitor, Varik has not forgotten your rebellion. His gaze slid toward Ethan, chained muscles slick with blood, eyes burning gold crimson. And this is the hybrid, the forbidden child of both curses. His smile was razor thin. Varik wants him alive. Ethan spat blood into the dirt. Tell him to come take me himself. The herald's smirk twisted into something darker. Soon. Bolts flew again as hunters tried to regain the momentum, but the heralds barely moved. With gestures sharp as blades, they unleashed waves of dark power, crushing hunters in their own armor, snapping wolves' necks mid-leap, silencing witches before spells could leave their lips. Ethan lunged through the devastation, claws ripping for Caius, but Vera's shadow tendrils lashed out, coiling around his limbs. He fought, roaring, muscles straining as the shadows tightened, choking him. Dante blurred forward, slicing the tendrils with his blade. "Back off, witch!" he hissed, driving her away with a flurry of strikes. Malric intercepted, moving with lightning speed. His blade clashed against Dante's in a storm of sparks. Old rivalries burned in their eyes as they locked, strength against strength, both unwilling to yield. The battlefield fractured again, wolves and hunters still killing each other, witches screaming in the chaos, yet the true war was now between Ethan, Dante, and the heralds. Ethan finally broke free, crimson energy flaring from deep within. His claws glowed, his eyes wild, his hybrid blood burning hotter than ever. He struck Caius with such force that the herald staggered for the first time, blood running from his lip. The vampire wiped it with calm fingers, eyes narrowing. "You're stronger than expected. Varik will want to taste this himself." Dante cut Malric across the chest, driving him back, and roared to Ethan, "We need to move, now! This fight isn't winnable!" Ethan's claws dripped, his chest heaving. He wanted to tear Caius apart, but even he could feel it. The air itself bent around these monsters. They weren't here to die. They were here to deliver a message. And that message was clear. Varik was coming. The battlefield was collapsing. Wolves scattered, witches lay burned, and hunters fled in broken ranks. The heralds stood untouched in the chaos, their dark presence suffocating every breath of resistance. Caius raised his hand, summoning another wave of shadow that crushed fleeing wolves into pulp. Dante hissed, blood running down his arm from Malric's blade. "Ethan, we can't hold them. Move!" Ethan's claws dripped, his body steaming from silver wounds and shadow burns. His rage screamed to tear them apart, but instinct cut through the fury. He felt it. Something worse than heralds, pressing on the world like a storm at sea. Varik's will was stirring. If they stayed, they'd die before the Vampire Lord even arrived. He slashed through a wall of hunters blocking the tree line, clearing a path. "This way!" Dante blurred to his side, carving down another squad. The hybrid and the vampire moved together, a storm of blood and steel, forcing a corridor through the chaos. Behind them, witches unleashed last desperate spells, flames and lightning shattering the night, but the heralds walked through it untouched, their dark pursuit calm, relentless. Ethan ripped through a burning barricade, fire singeing his flesh as he barreled into the forest. Dante followed, cloak trailing smoke. Hunters chased, hounds baying, silver bolts hissing through the trees. One buried deep into Ethan's thigh, dropping him to a knee. He snarled, ripping it free, blood pouring hot. Dante grabbed his arm, hauling him up with unnatural strength. "Don't fall now, beast. You die here, and I'm dragged down with you." They sprinted through the trees, their breaths ragged, shadows hunting them. Ethan's claws carved through branches, his hybrid speed carrying him despite the pain. Dante glanced back. Torches flared behind them, and farther still, 3 pairs of crimson eyes glided through the darkness. The heralds were still coming. The forest thinned, leading into a ravine. The roar of water thundered below. Ethan skidded to the edge, chest heaving. The only way forward was down. Hunters poured from the trees, weapons raised. "Trapped!" one shouted. Ethan bared his fangs. "Then we make our own path." Without hesitation, he grabbed Dante by the cloak and hurled himself over the edge. The ravine swallowed them whole. They crashed into the river below, the current ripping them under, spinning them through black water. Ethan fought to surface, claws digging at stone, while Dante cut through the flow like a shadow, dragging them both toward air. They broke the surface together, gasping as the river carried them away from the hunters' torches and the heralds' burning eyes. For now, they lived. But war had only begun.
The river spat them out hours later, tossing their battered bodies onto the rocky bank. Ethan lay gasping, his wound steaming in the moonlight, crimson eyes flickering with the effort of healing. Dante sat upright almost immediately, shaking off the water like a cat, his expression unreadable. "You bleed too much," Dante said, his tone cool as he watched Ethan struggle upright. Ethan growled through clenched teeth. "And you talk too much." He pulled a broken bolt from his thigh, snarling as silver hissed against his skin. The forest around them was silent, too silent. No wolves howled, no witches whispered in the dark. The panorama world had gone quiet, pressed down under fear of hunters and heralds alike. Ethan felt it in his bones. His kind, what remained of them, were being wiped out while he fought to breathe. Dante stood, brushing river muck from his cloak. Varik won't stop with this purge. He'll feed on the chaos until nothing is left but his rule. Hunters think they are cleansing the world. They don't see they are building his empire. Ethan's golden crimson gaze snapped to him. "So what's your plan? Hide in your castle while the rest of us die?" The vampire's fangs glinted. "I don't hide, but I don't fight blind either. Varik is ancient, stronger than me, stronger than you. If we're to survive, we need allies, wolves, witches, even covens who hate me. Alone we'll be crushed. Together we may have a chance." The hybrid's claws dug into the soil. "Wolves won't trust me. I'm not one of them anymore. Witches despise my blood. Vampires hate yours.
You think they'll follow us? They'll follow survival, Dante replied coldly. Every night more of them burn. Fear makes creatures desperate. Desperate creatures can be bound. Before Ethan could answer, a rustle cut through the night. Figures emerged from the tree line. Witches, their robes torn, their eyes blazing with exhaustion. Behind them limped wolves, their fur scorched, their numbers pinned. A witch with a staff stepped forward, her voice sharp. We saw the river take you, thought you were dead. We were ready to pray it so. Her gaze flicked to Ethan, then Dante. But if you live, maybe fate wants something else. Ethan bristled. What do you want? The witch's staff burned faintly with power. Protection. Hunters are slaughtering us. Varik's shadows tear through our covens. If you can fight them, we will listen. Dante's smirk was faint, almost cruel. Seems the world delivers allies to our feet. Ethan's claws flexed as he looked at the broken wolves, the weary witches. His instinct screamed they weren't his pack, never would be. But the truth pressed harder. Without them, there would be no one left to fight beside. Fine, Ethan growled, his eyes blazing. Then we start fighting back. The witch raised her staff, and for the first time in days, the forest stirred with hope instead of silence.
The clearing glowed faintly with the dying embers of campfires as wolves, witches, and vampires circled one another warily. The air was thick with mistrust, fangs bared, claws flexing, spells humming. Every creature ready to strike if a wrong word was spoken. Ethan stood at the center, shoulders squared, wounds still raw, but his presence undeniable. His golden crimson eyes swept the crowd, locking on each face. You all hate me, he said flatly, his voice cutting through the whispers. Wolves call me tainted. Witches say I'm cursed. Vampires think I'm an abomination. He flexed his claws, blood still crusted on them. I don't care. Hate me later. Right now, the hunters are burning our world to ash. Varik is feeding on it. You want to live? We fight together. The wolves bristled, growling, but none stepped forward. The witches whispered among themselves. One finally spoke, a scarred wolf with one eye clouded white. Why follow you, hybrid? You're not pack. Ethan's eyes were fire. Because I'm the only one who survived both hunters and Varik's heralds. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a growl. Follow me, and I'll drag you through the fire alive. Stay behind, and you'll burn. The one-eyed wolf held his stare for a long moment, then dipped his head slightly. Not submission, but recognition. Dante stepped forward then, cloak rippling, his presence like ice to Ethan's fire. Varik believes this world is already his. He's wrong, but he won't fall to scattered packs and broken covens. We forge a warband tonight. One blade, one will, and it cuts for Varik's throat. The witch with the staff raised it high, flames sparking at its tip. Words are smoke, prove it with blood. A low murmur swept the gathering. The old ways. The oath. Ethan looked at the witch, then at Dante, then at the uneasy crowd. Slowly, he dragged his claws across his palm, blood dripping onto the soil. I fight until Varik falls, or I do.
his voice carried like thunder. "This is my oath." The wolves followed one by one, biting into their own forelegs, blood spilling into the dirt. The witches cut their palms with silver blades, crimson mingling with spellfire. Even Dante opened his wrist, his blood black-red, burning as it touched the ground. The soil steamed, the mingled blood hissing, binding them in something older than trust, necessity. When the last drop hit earth, a howl rose, not from wolves alone, but from witches, vampires, and even Ethan himself. The sound split the night sky, carrying across the forest like a storm's roar. For the first time in centuries, enemies had become one war band, bound by blood. And already, the hunter's horns blew in the distance. The horns grew louder, echoing through the trees like a death knell. Wolves lifted their heads, growls rumbling low. Witches readied their staves, eyes glowing as spellfire flickered between their hands. Vampires melted into the shadows, fangs glinking, poised to strike. Ethan stood at the front, claws flexing, his crimson gold eyes fixed on the tree line. "Hold the line. They'll come in waves." His voice was steady, but inside, the hybrid's blood roared. This was it, the first trial of their fragile unity. The forest erupted. Hunters poured in with disciplined precision, shields raised, torches blazing, crossbows already loosing bolts tipped in silver. The first wave struck like a hammer, and the night exploded into chaos. Wolves leapt forward, ripping into armored men, their howls cutting through the screams. Hunters responded with burning nets, yanking beasts down, silver spears plunging into their ribs. Witches hurled fireballs that lit the forest in a hellish glow, blasting squads apart. But hunters countered with holy oil bombs, explosions searing witches alive. Ethan dove headlong into the fray, claws rending shields in half, his roar scattering men. Bolts sank into his flesh, sizzling, but his hybrid rage drowned the pain. He ripped through a line of hunters like they were paper, his fury leaving a wake of torn armor and blood. At his side, Dante moved like a storm of shadows, his blade carving through men with surgical precision. He slipped through the ranks, leaving corpses in his wake, his crimson eyes never still. Where Ethan was a beast, Dante was death in silence. Still, the hunters pressed harder, their discipline held, their ranks unbreaking, even as bodies fell. Commander Harker himself led the charge, silver spear flashing, his voice a whip. "Burn the witches, break the wolves, chain the hybrid." His zeal drove them into the slaughter without fear. A squad swarmed Ethan, nets and chains flying. Silver burned across his skin, dragging him to his knees. A spear punched through his side, pinning him to the ground. Pain flared white-hot, but before he could collapse, fire erupted around him, witches blasting the hunters apart, screaming in defiance. Dante yanked the spear free, shoving Ethan upright. "Don't falter now, beast. Your warband watches." Ethan roared, ripping the chains, flinging the broken links into hunters' faces. He surged to his feet, crimson eyes blazing, and tore into their ranks with renewed fury. His claws flashed, his fangs tore, and his voice carried above the chaos. "Stand together!" Ethan roared. "Fight as one!" The wolves howled, witches screamed spells, vampires struck from the shadows, and for the first time, they moved like a single warband. The hunters broke. Commander Harker fell back, blood on his face, his silver spear still raised. His voice echoed through the clearing. "You think you've won, hybrid? This was only a test. Varik comes for you all." Then he vanished into the smoke, leaving the ground littered with bodies, both hunter and creature alike. Ethan stood heaving, his claws dripping, his body shaking. They had held, barely, but in blood and fire, the warband was born. The battlefield smoldered with the stench of blood and burning flesh. Wolves licked wounds under the pale light. Witches gathered their dead in silence, and vampires sifted through the corpses with cold detachment. The hunters had been beaten back, but the scars of mistrust were already festering. Ethan stood at the center, his claws still stained red, his body trembling with exhaustion. The hybrid had fought harder than any of them, yet when he tried to meet their eyes, he saw only suspicion. Whispers coiled like smoke around him. Abomination, cursed, monster. Dante appeared at his side, cloak trailing like a shadow. His crimson eyes glimmered as he surveyed the gathering. "They don't trust you, wolf," he murmured, his voice sharp as a blade. "Not truly. They frighten you as much as the hunters do." Ethan growled low, his gaze sweeping over the wolves that had once been his kin. "I didn't ask for trust. I asked for survival." His eyes narrowed on the one-eyed wolf who had spoken before. "But if they can't stand with me, they'll fall without me." The one-eyed wolf bared his teeth, hackles rising. "You're no pack. You're neither wolf nor man, nor anything that belongs in this world. Why should we bleed for you?" Before Ethan could answer, a witch with white hair slammed her staff into the earth, sparks erupting around her. "Enough! The blood oath was sworn. Doubt it, and the oath will consume us all. Do you want to be bound in fire for eternity?" Her words stilled the muttering, but the unease remained. Wolves shifted uneasily. Vampires whispered among themselves. Even witches eyed Ethan with a flicker of fear. Dante's smirk was faint but cruel. "They hate you, beast, and they hate me. Yet here we stand, the only ones strong enough to keep them from tearing each other apart." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a hiss. "Irony tastes sweet, doesn't it?" Ethan ignored him, his jaw tight. He raised his voice, cutting across the doubts. "Hunters will come again, stronger, and Varik meets in the shadows, feeding on our fear. You think you can face that divided? Keep your mistrust, but keep your blades ready, because the next time they come, they'll come to kill us all." Silence followed, heavy as stone. Then, slowly, wolves lowered their heads. Witches tightened their grips on their staffs. Vampires melted back into shadow. The fragile truce held, barely. But Ethan could feel it, crawling under his skin like a curse. The warband was one spark away from tearing itself apart, and Varik would not need to strike if their unity shattered first. Dante chuckled low, almost to himself. "Your warband, beast, a powder keg. Let's see how long before it burns." And far beyond the forest, unseen by any of them, Varik's laughter echoed through a ruined hall, as if he had already heard their doubts. Far from the smoking forest, deep beneath a mountain carved by centuries of blood, Varik sat upon a throne of bone. The chamber was vast, lit by rivers of molten fire that ran through cracks in the stone, casting his figure in a hellish bow. His skin was pale as marble, his eyes black voids rimmed with crimson, and his smile razor sharp. Around him knelt lesser vampires, their heads bowed low, their bodies trembling beneath his presence. Chains rattled as human slaves were dragged forward, their throats cut, blood spilling into goblets carried by silent servants. Varik raised one cup lazily, sipping the crimson nectar as though it were wine. "Prophetic," he murmured, his voice echoing unnaturally across the chamber. "The hunters bleed themselves dry, chasing shadows through the forest, and still they fail to see it is I who guides them." His smile widened, cruel and cold. Man, wolf, witch, vampire, all pawns, and I am the hand that moves them. A massive armored figure approached, helm shaped like a snarling beast. He knelt, his voice deep and guttural. "Lord Varik, the hunters send word. Their commander falters, Harker's resolve weakens." Varik rose, his cloak of black ash unfurling like wings. "Then feed his weakness with fear. Tell him the hybrid grows stronger. Whisper of betrayal among his allies. Let his paranoia rot him from the inside. He will believe it came from his own men." The armored servant bowed low. "As you command." Varik turned toward the far wall, where a mirror of obsidian shimmered. Within its depths, the forest appeared. Ethan standing bloodied, Dante at his side, the warband scattered in uneasy silence. Varik's lips curved into a serpentine smile. "Ah, the hybrid," he whispered, touching the mirror's surface. "Cursed child of wolf and fang. You believe yourself chosen. You believe strength will unite them. But strength without control is weakness, and when you fall, beast, I will drink the ashes of your kind." He clenched his fist. The image in the mirror shuddered, cracking, as the reality itself trembled beneath his will. "Gather the lords," Varik commanded, his voice like thunder. "It is time the panorama world remembers its master. And when the humans kneel beneath our dominion, when their hunters are spent and broken, then I will stretch my hand across the mortal realm and close it into a fist." The chamber roared with the voices of his coven. "Varik! Varik! Varik!" Their cries echoed through the mountain like the tolling of a funeral bell. And far away, Ethan shivered without knowing why. The hunter encampment was a fortress of iron and fire, built in a clearing scorched bare of trees. Tents stretched in rows, their canvas stained with blood and ash. Crossbows lined the barricades, silver bolts glinting in the torchlight. The smell of oil, sweat, and iron filled the night. Commander Harker sat alone at a heavy wooden table inside his command tent. Maps of the panorama lands were spread before him, marked with circles of blood and ash. His silver spear leaned against the wall, still stained from the last battle. His face was drawn, his eyes sunken, his knuckles white around a goblet of bitter wine. "Failure," he muttered to himself, the word heavy as stone. "Failure against wolves, failure against witches, failure against the hybrid." He slammed the cup down, the wine splattering across the maps. And Varik, always Varik in the shadows. The tent flap rustled. A young officer entered, face pale, sweat beading his brow. "Commander, men whispered that we fight the wrong enemy, that the hybrid is not the true threat." Harker snapped up, fury blazing in his eyes. "Blasphemy! The hybrid is the devil's spawn. He bleeds corruption into the earth." His hand gripped the spear tight, veins bulging in his arm. I saw his claws rip through men as though they were straw. Tell me he is not the threat. The officer shifted uneasily, but did not meet his gaze. It is said, Lord Varik walks again, that he manipulates us, that we bleed for his game. For a moment, silence. Then Harker's laugh filled the tent, a harsh, bitter sound. Varik has always been the serpent in the grass. We swore our oaths to crush his kind, and we will. His voice lowered, shaking. But why then? Why do I feel his hand guiding mine even now? The officer shifted uneasily, then added, Men desert, Commander. Some whisper we fight for nothing. Some say Varik cannot be stopped. Harker's fist crashed into the table, splitting the wood. Then I will stop him myself. His voice thundered with rage, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the doubt worming into his heart. When the officer fled, Harker slumped into his chair. Alone once more, his gaze fell upon the silver spear. The weapon felt heavier tonight, as though it no longer wished to be wielded. In the silence, a shadow shifted in the corner of the tent. A whisper, soft as silk, slid into Harker's ear. You cannot stop me. You never could. But serve me, and I will let you live long enough to see the hybrid fall. Harker's eyes widened, sweat pouring down his face. He spun, spear raised, but the corner was empty. Only shadows, only silence. Still the whisper lingered in his skull, burrowing deep. And for the first time in his life, Commander Harker wondered if his crusade was already lost.
Night blanketed the forest, its silence broken only by the crackle of dying campfires. The war band had withdrawn after their bloody stand, gathering in a ravine where the trees loomed high and the earth itself seemed to hide them from hunter patrols. Wolves lay in uneasy slumber. Witches muttered protective charms, and vampires kept to the edges, their crimson eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Ethan sat apart, sharpening his claws on a stone. His body still ached from silver burns, his wounds healing slower than before. He could feel eyes on him, always. Whispers wound through the camp like snakes. Hybrid, abomination, cursed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Dante emerged from the shadows, silent as death. They fear you more with every battle, he said quietly, almost amused. It would take very little to tip them into a frenzy. His crimson eyes glimmered with cruel delight. Perhaps a knife in the dark. Ethan shot him a glare, his voice low and rough. Not tonight. We've lost enough. But even as he spoke, chaos erupted. A wolf howled in pain, then silence. Shouts broke out as figures lunged from the darkness, blades flashing. Not hunters, their own. A vampire tore into a witch's throat, blood spraying across the firelight. Wolves leapt onto witches, witches shrieked spells at vampires, and in an instant, the fragile alliance fractured into carnage. Ethan roared, surging to his feet. Stop! His voice thundered through the ravine, shaking the earth. But the frenzy drowned him out. Blades clashing, spells exploding, bodies hitting the ground. He dove into the fray, ripping apart the traitor vampire with a single swipe of his claws, then yanked a witch back before a wolf's fangs could close around her throat. His fury burned, but his heart sunk. This was no accident. Varik Dante hissed, his blade cutting down another betrayer. His eyes narrowed at the fighting, his voice venom. This is his hand. He whispers in their minds. He feeds their fear. Ethan's chest heaved, rage burning in him like wildfire. He pinned the one-eyed wolf to the ground, claws at his throat. Who turned you? Who whispered in your ear? The wolf snarled, spitting blood. You, cursed one, you will doom us all. His eyes rolled back, foam at his lips, as though something inside had burned him alive for speaking too much. Dante cursed under his breath. He silences them even as they betray. When the fighting ended, the ground was slick with blood. Half a dozen witches lay dead, 3 wolves were gutted, 2 vampires turned to ash. The warband still stood, but broken, bleeding, staring at Ethan with hollow eyes. Ethan's voice shook with fury. He wants us divided. He wants us weak. His claws dug into the earth. I'll rip his heart from his chest before I let him tear us apart. But in the shadows of the trees, unseen, Varik's laughter carried on the wind.
The echoes of betrayal had barely faded when the first horn split the night. Its blast rolled through the ravine like thunder, followed by the pounding of boots and the rattle of armor. The hunters had come. Ethan's head snapped up, his claws still dripping with the blood of traitors. His ears caught the faint hiss of crossbows primed in the dark. "Positions!" he roared, his voice cracking across the camp. "They're here!" Torches flared along the ridges above the ravine, casting the warband in a cage of firelight. Hundreds of hunters lined the cliffs, crossbows trained, silver glinting at every angle. At their center stood Commander Harker, his silver spear raised high, his face twisted in zeal and madness. "Creatures of filth," Harker's voice boomed, echoing down into the ravine. "You slaughter one another like beasts, and still you dare to claim this land. Tonight we cleanse the earth of your stain." His spear dropped. "Fire!" The night exploded. Bolts rained like a storm, cutting through wolves mid-leap, pinning witches to the earth, shattering vampires into ash. Screams filled the ravine, blood splattering across the stones. Wolves surged forward, trying to scale the walls, but nets of silver dragged them back down. Witches hurled fire upward, igniting the cliffs, but the hunters' shields held firm. Ethan charged headlong into the storm, bolts tearing into his flesh. His hybrid blood sizzled where silver struck, but he tore through nets, ripped down shields, and hurled hunters screaming into the abyss. His roar shook the walls, defiant, furious. Beside him, Dante became a phantom of death, his blade a streak of crimson light, his movements too fast for mortal eyes. He slipped through the chaos, slitting throats, cutting chains, dragging allies from death's edge. His cloak flared like shadow wings, his laughter cold as steel. But the hunters pressed relentlessly, their numbers overwhelming. Oil bombs crashed into the ravine, flames erupting, consuming wolves and witches alike. The air filled with smoke and choking ash, and still Harker's voice thundered from above. "Bleed! Burn! Break!" The warband fought with everything they had, but they were crumbling. Ethan's chest heaved, his body torn, his claws slick. He looked up at the cliffs, at the endless tide of men, and knew they couldn't hold the ravine. "Out!" he roared, his voice ragged. "We break through, or we die here." Wolves rallied to his cry, witches summoned one last surge of fire, vampires struck upward like daggers in the dark. Together they smashed through the northern barricade, bodies falling on both sides as blood painted the forest floor. Harker hurled his spear, silver flashing as it tore across the clearing, aimed straight for Ethan's heart. At the last instant, Dante shoved him aside, the spear tearing into his own chest instead. His body jerked, blood spraying, and he staggered but did not fall. His crimson eyes burned as he wrenched the spear free, snapping it in two with a hiss of rage. Harker's face blanched at the sight, his command faltering for the first time. And the warband, bleeding and broken but alive, vanished into the smoke-choked woods, leaving the ravine a grave of fire and screams.
The survivors stumbled through the forest, smoke clinging to their skin, the cries of the dying still echoing in their ears. Blood dripped from wounds that refused to close, paws limped across broken roots, and the witches' voices trembled as they whispered feeble charms to keep the dying alive. The war band was no army anymore. It was a scarred remnant. Ethan led them, his claws still stained, his body burning with pain. Every step was agony, silver burns crawling across his flesh, but he would not falter. His eyes burned gold and crimson in the moonlight, unyielding. Behind him, the wolves followed with lowered heads, the witches leaned on their staffs, and the vampires glided silently, their pride stripped raw. Dante walked at his side, the broken haft of Harker's spear still jutting from his shoulder. Blood trickled steadily down his chest, yet his posture remained tall, his smirk ghosting his lips. "You should thank me, beast. If I hadn't stepped in, you'd be meat for worms." Ethan glanced at him, jaw tight. "You saved me?" His voice was rough, grudging. "Why?" Dante chuckled, crimson eyes gleaming even through the pain. "Because if anyone kills you, it will be me, not some self-righteous mortal with a spear." He spat blood into the dirt, then added more quietly, "And because I gave my word." The warband stopped at the ruins of an old temple, its stones cracked, vines strangling its pillars. Here, under the shattered roof, the survivors collapsed, the weight of despair pressing down like a coffin lid. Whispers rose, defeat, surrender, doom. Ethan silenced them with a roar that shook the stones. "Enough!" His voice cracked the night. "We bleed, we burn, we crawl through hell itself, but we are not finished." He bared his claws, blood dripping from them. "Varik thinks us broken, let him. Tonight we bind our wounds, tomorrow we take the fight to his throne." The wolves raised their heads, growls building in their throats. The witches lifted their staffs, sparks flickering once more. The vampires hissed softly, their eyes burning. The fire had not died, it smoldered. Ethan stepped onto the altar, his silhouette framed by the moon. "Swear it now, one last oath, not for me, not for vengeance, not for pride, for survival, for freedom. We cut Varik's throat or we die trying, no half measures." Dante's laughter was low, cruel, but when he raised his bloodied hand, every eye turned. "So it be," he said, voice like steel. "Let the night itself hear our vow." One by one, voices joined, wolves howling, witches chanting, vampires whispering like the dead. The sound swelled into a roar that shook the broken temple, echoing across the panorama world like a storm. And in the mountain throne, Varik's eyes opened, black fire burning in their depths. He had heard, and he welcomed them. The mountain loomed before them, its peak lost in black clouds, its heart glowing with rivers of molten fire.
The path to Varik's throne was strewn with bones, the air thick with the stench of centuries of death. As the warband approached, the earth itself seemed to resist them, whispers rising from the ground like the cries of the damned. Ethan led at the front, his claws gleaming in the pale light of the fading moon. His hybrid blood thrummed in his veins, every heartbeat a drum of war. Behind him, wolves padded in silence, witches raised staffs that glowed with faint embers, and vampires stalked with eyes like burning coals. At his side, Dante walked tall despite his wounds, his smirk sharp as ever. The gates of bone creaked open, and Varik's voice rolled out, deep and terrible. "So the broken come to break me. How quaint." Then the ground erupted. Varik's legions poured forth, ghouls with jaws unhinged, blood slaves chained in armor, vampire lords cloaked in shadow. The night howl, the steel, fang, and spell collided. The battle was chaos incarnate. Wolves tore into ghouls, snapping bone and sinew. Witches unleashed storms of fire and lightning, blasting the thralls to ash. Vampires clashed fang to fang with their traitorous kin, crimson blood painting the stones. Still, the tide seemed endless, wave after wave battering the warband. Ethan was a storm unto himself, ripping through enemies with claws and fangs, his crimson gold eyes blazing. He fought with the rage of a wolf and the precision of a vampire, every movement a blur of violence. "For freedom!" he roared, his voice echoing through the carnage. Dante moved like a shadow given flesh, his blade a streak of death. He cut through Varik's lords without slowing, his laughter cruel even as his blood dripped freely. "Come, Varik, face us, or rot on your throne!" And Varik answered. He emerged from the throne hall, tall and terrible, his cloak of ash spreading like wings, his eyes voids rimmed in crimson flame. His very presence crushed the air, bending the wills of lesser creatures. With a single gesture, he shattered a dozen witches into dust, their screams vanishing on the wind. Ethan and Dante charged together. Claws and steel struck against shadow and flame, each impact shaking the mountain. Varik moved like a god of death, parrying Dante's blade with a flick of his fingers, seizing Ethan by the throat and hurling him across the battlefield. But Ethan rose, blood pouring, fury burning brighter. He roared and leapt again, his claws sinking into Varik's flesh, tearing shadow into ribbons. Dante's sword pierced through the Vampire Lord's chest, black ichor spraying like molten tar. Varik laughed, even as his body burned. "Fools, I am eternal!" Ethan's crimson eyes flared, his hybrid blood ignited with the power of the blood moon itself. Not eternal enough. He tore his claws through Varik's heart as Dante severed his head in a single strike. The mountain shook, the legion screamed and dissolved into ash. Varik's body crumbled, his cloak of shadows scattering to nothing. And then, silence. The warband stood bloodied, broken, but alive. Wolves howled mournfully, witches wept over their fallen, vampires hissed in quiet triumph. Ethan staggered, his chest heaving, his body broken but unyielding. Dante stood beside him, smirk faint but real, blood dripping from his blade. "Well, beast, it seems we've killed a god." Ethan's golden crimson eyes turned to him. "No," he said, voice rough, steady. "We killed a tyrant, and now we begin again." The first light of dawn broke across the horizon, spilling over the battlefield, bathing the survivors in pale gold. For the first time in centuries, the panorama world saw a new dawn not ruled by shadow, but far away, deep in places even Varik had not touched. Something stirred at the taste of spilled blood, and Ethan knew this was only the beginning.
And that brings us to the end of Blood Moon 2. The hunters burned, the witches rose, the wolves howled, and Ethan stood unbroken beside Dante as Varik finally fell. But even in victory, the panorama world trembles, because dawn only means new wars are coming. What do you think? Will Ethan ever be more than a monster, or is he destined to become the leader this broken world needs? Drop your theories in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this saga, don't forget to like, share with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe to Don Blessing Story Studio. More epic stories are on the way.